You are about to hear the true story of Karl-Ludwig Sand, the polite theology student who murdered a famous writer in cold blood. But this isn't just a true crime, it is designed for sleep. Our deep red visuals and soothing narration allow your mind to rest while you absorb the history. Alexandre Dumas explores a terrifying contradiction. How does a man of God become an assassin? Why did the public cheer for the killer instead of the victim? And why, even facing the executioner, did he refuse to apologize? Please like this video, comment "night" to let us know you're listening, and subscribe for more dark history sleep stories. Now let's begin. Celebrated crimes, Karl-Ludwig Sand. On March 22, 1819, around 9 in the morning, a young man, about 23 or 24 years old, paused on a small hill. He wore the attire of a German student, a short frock coat with silk braiding, tight trousers, and high boots. This spot, located 3/4 of the way between Kaiserthal and Mannheim, offered a clear view of the latter city. Mannheim appeared serene and inviting, rising amidst gardens that were once ramparts, now embracing it like a girdle of foliage and flowers. Reaching this point, the young man removed his cap, adorned with 3 interlaced silver oak leaves on its peak. He stood bareheaded for a moment, letting the fresh air from the Neckar Valley cool his brow. At first glance, his irregular features made a strange impression. But soon, the pallor of his smallpox-scarred face, the infinite gentleness of his eyes, and the elegant frame of his long, flowing black hair, which curved admirably around a broad, high forehead, drew forth a feeling of sad sympathy, an emotion one yields to without questioning. Though it was still early, he seemed to have traveled some distance, his boots covered with dust. But he was clearly nearing his destination. Letting his cap drop and hooking his long pipe, the inseparable companion of the German Borsch, into his belt, he pulled a small notebook from his pocket. With a pencil he wrote, "Left Wanheim at 5 in the morning, came in sight of Mannheim at 9:15. Then, returning the notebook to his pocket, he stood motionless for a moment, his lips moving as if in silent prayer. He picked up his hat and continued with a firm step towards Mannheim. This young student was Karl-Ludwig Sand, traveling from Jena, via Frankfurt and Darmstadt, with the intent to assassinate Kotzebue. Now, as we are about to present one of those terrible actions for which conscience is the sole judge, we must fully acquaint our readers with the man whom kings saw as an assassin, judges as a fanatic, and the youth of Germany as a hero. Charles Louis Sand was born on October 5, 1795, in Wunsiedel, in the Fichtel Wald. He was the youngest son of Godfrey Christopher Sand, first President and Counselor of Justice to the King of Prussia, and Dorothea Jane Wilhelmina Schapf. Besides 2 elder brothers, George, a merchant in St. Gall, and Fritz, an advocate in the Berlin Court of Appeal, he had an elder sister named Caroline and a younger sister named Julia. While still an infant, he contracted a malignant form of smallpox. The virus spread throughout his body, exposing his ribs and nearly consuming his skull. For several months, he lay between life and death, but life eventually prevailed. He remained weak and sickly until his 7th year, when a brain fever attacked him, again endangering his life. However, this fever, upon leaving him, seemed to carry away all traces of his former illness. From that moment, his health and strength blossomed. Yet, during these 2 long illnesses, his education had fallen far behind, and he could not begin elementary studies until the age of 8. Furthermore, his physical sufferings had retarded his intellectual development, requiring him to work twice as hard as others to achieve the same results. Observing young Sand's efforts, even as a child, to overcome his physical challenges, Professor Salfranck, a learned and distinguished man and rector of the Hof Gymnasium, developed a deep affection for him. Later, when appointed director of the gymnasium at Ratisbon, Salfranck could not part with his pupil and took Sand with him. In this town, at the age of 11, Sand gave the first proof of his courage and humanity. One day, walking with friends, he heard cries for help and ran towards the sound. A little boy, 8 or 9 years old, had fallen into a pond. Without hesitation, Sand, disregarding his best clothes, of which he was very proud, leaped into the water. After immense efforts for a child his age, he succeeded in bringing the drowning boy to shore. By the age of 12 or 13, Sand had become more active, skillful, and determined than many of his elders. He often enjoyed battling the lads from the town and neighboring villages. The setting for these childish conflicts, which in their innocent way mirrored the great battles then drenching Germany in blood, was usually a plain extending from Wonsiedel to St. Catherine's Mountain. This mountain had ruins at its summit, including a well-preserved tower. Sand, one of the most eager fighters, noticed his side had been defeated several times due to numerical inferiority. He resolved to fortify St. Catherine's Tower to compensate for this disadvantage, planning to retreat into it during the next battle if the outcome proved unfavorable. He shared this plan with his companions, who received it with enthusiasm. A week was spent gathering defensive weapons in the tower and repairing its doors and stairs. These preparations were made so secretly that the enemy army remained unaware. Sunday arrived. Holidays were battle days. Whether from shame over their last defeat or another reason, Sand's band was even weaker than usual. However, confident in their means of retreat, he accepted the battle. The struggle was brief. His party was too weak in numbers for prolonged resistance. They began to retreat in the best order possible to St. Catherine's Tower, reaching it before much damage was incurred. Once there, some combatants ascended to the ramparts, and while others defended themselves at the foot of the wall, they began to shower stones and pebbles upon the conquerors. The latter, surprised by this new defense strategy, retreated slightly. The remaining defenders seized the moment to retreat into the fortress and shut the door. Great was the astonishment of the besiegers. They had always seen that door easily broken down, yet now it presented an impenetrable barrier. 3 or 4 went to find tools to break it, while the rest of the attacking force blockaded the garrison. After half an hour, the messengers returned not only with levers and picks, but also with significant reinforcements, lads from the village where they had fetched the tools. The assault began. Sand and his companions defended themselves desperately, but it soon became clear that without help, the garrison would be forced to capitulate. It was proposed that they draw lots to choose one of the besieged. This person, despite the danger, would leave the tower, make their way through the enemy, and summon the other Wonsiedel lads who had faint-heartedly remained home. The tale of their comrades' peril, and the disgrace of a surrender that would fall upon them all, would surely overcome their indolence and induce them to create a diversion, allowing the garrison to attempt a sortie. This suggestion was adopted, but instead of leaving the decision to chance, Sand volunteered as the messenger. Knowing his courage, skill, and swiftness, the proposition was unanimously accepted, and the young Decius prepared his act of devotion. The deed was not without danger. There were only 2 ways out: through the door, which would lead directly into enemy hands, or by jumping from a rampart so high that the enemy had not placed a guard there. Sand, without a moment's hesitation, went to the rampart. Ever religious, even in his childish games, he offered a short prayer. Then, without fear or hesitation, with almost superhuman confidence, he sprang to the ground, a 22-foot drop. Sand instantly flew to Wonsiedel, reaching it even though the enemy had dispatched their best runners in pursuit. The garrison, witnessing the success of their enterprise, gained fresh courage and united their efforts against the besiegers, trusting in Sand's eloquence, which held great sway over his young companions. Indeed, in half an hour, he reappeared at the head of some 30 boys his age, armed with slings and crossbows. The besiegers, about to be attacked from both front and rear, recognized the disadvantage of their position and retreated. Victory belonged to Sand's party, and all the honors of the day were his. We have recounted this anecdote in detail, so our readers may understand the character of the man from the character of the child. Moreover, we will see him develop, always calm and superior amidst small events as amidst large ones. Around the same time, Sand miraculously escaped 2 dangers. One day, a hod full of plaster fell from a scaffold and broke at his feet. On another occasion, the Prince of Coburg, who was staying at Sand's parents' house during the King of Prussia's visit to the baths of Alexander, was galloping home with 4 horses. He suddenly encountered young Karl in a gateway. Sand could not escape to the right or left without risking being crushed between the wall and the wheels, and the coachman, at such a pace, could not rein in his horses. Sand flung himself onto his face, and the carriage passed over him without him receiving so much as a single scratch from either horses or wheels. From that moment, many regarded him as predestined, saying that the hand of God was upon him. Meanwhile, political events were unfolding around the boy, and their gravity matured him before his age. Napoleon weighed upon Germany like another Sennacherib. Staps had attempted to play the part of Mutius Scaevola and had died a martyr. Sand was at Hof at that time, a student at the gymnasium headed by his good tutor Salfranc. He learned that the man he regarded as the Antichrist was coming to review troops in that town. He immediately left and went home to his parents, who asked him why he had left the gymnasium. "Because I could not have been in the same town with Napoleon," he answered, "without trying to kill him, and I do not feel my hands strong enough for that yet." This occurred in 1809. Sand was 14 years old. Peace, signed on October 15th, gave Germany some respite and allowed the young fanatic to resume his studies without distraction from political considerations. But in 1811, he was again preoccupied when he learned that the gymnasium was to be dissolved and replaced by a primary school. Rector Salfranc was appointed a teacher there, but instead of the 1,000 florins his former position brought him, the new one was worth only 500. Karl could not remain in a primary school, where he could not continue his education. He wrote to his mother to announce this event, and to tell her with what equanimity the old German philosopher had borne it. Here is the answer from Sand's mother. It will serve to show the character of the woman whose mighty heart never faltered amidst the severest suffering. The answer bears the stamp of that German mysticism, of which we have no idea in France. "My dear Karl, you could not have given me more grievous news than that of the event which has just befallen your tutor and adopted father. Nevertheless, terrible though it may be, do not doubt that he will resign himself to it, to give his pupils a great example of the submission every subject owes to the king whom God has set over him. Furthermore, be well assured that in this world there is no other upright and well-calculated policy than that which grows out of the old precept. Honor God, be just and fear not. And reflect also that when injustice against the worthy becomes crying, the public voice makes itself heard and uplifts those who are cast down. But if, contrary to all probability, this did not happen, if God should impose this sublime probation upon the virtue of our friend, if the world were to disown him and Providence were to become to that degree his debtor, yet in that case there are, believe me, supreme compensations. All the things and all the events that occur around us and that act upon us are but machines set in motion by a higher hand, so as to complete our education for a higher world, in which alone we shall take our true place. Apply yourself, therefore, my dear child, to watch over yourself unceasingly and always, so that you may not mistake great and fine isolated actions for real virtue, and may be ready every moment to do all that your duty may require of you. Fundamentally, nothing is great, you see, and nothing small, when things are looked at apart from one another. It is only the putting of things together that produces the unity of evil or of good. Moreover, God only sends the trial to the heart where he has put strength, and the manner in which you tell me that your master has borne the misfortune that has befallen him is fresh proof of this great and eternal truth. You must emulate him, my dear child, and if you are obliged to leave Hof for Bamberg, you must resign yourself to it courageously. Man has 3 educations: that which he receives from his parents, that which circumstances impose upon him, and lastly that which he gives himself. If that misfortune should occur, pray to God that you may yourself worthily complete that last education, the most important of all. I will give you as an example the life and conduct of my father, of whom you have not heard very much, for he died before you were born, but whose mind and likeness are reproduced in you alone among all your brothers and sisters. The disastrous fire which reduced his native town to ashes destroyed his fortune and that of his relatives. Grief at having lost everything, for the fire broke out in the next house to his, cost his father his life. And while his mother, who for 6 years had been stretched on a bed of pain, where horrible convulsions held her fast, supported her 3 little girls by the needlework that she did in the intervals of suffering, he went as a mere clerk into one of the leading mercantile houses of Augsburg, where his lively and yet even temper made him welcome. There he learned a calling for which, however, he was not naturally adapted, and came back to the home of his birth with a pure and stainless heart, to be the support of his mother and his sisters. A man can do much when he wishes to do much. Join your efforts to my prayers, and leave the rest in the hands of God. The prediction of this Puritan woman was fulfilled. A short time afterward, Rector Salfranc was appointed professor at Richembourg, where Sand followed him. It was there that the events of 1813 found him. In March, he wrote to his mother, "I can scarcely, dear mother, express to you how calm and happy I begin to feel since I am permitted to believe in the enfranchisement of my country, of which I hear on every side as being so near at hand, of that country which, in my faith in God, I see beforehand free and mighty, that country for whose happiness I would undergo the greatest sufferings and even death. Take strength for this crisis. If by chance it should reach our good province, lift your eyes to the Almighty, then carry them back to beautiful rich nature. The goodness of God which preserved and protected so many men during the disastrous 30 Years' War can do, and will do now what it could and did then. As for me, I believe and hope." Leipzig came to justify Sand's presentiments. Then the year 1814 arrived, and he believed Germany free. On December 10th of the same year, he left Richembourg with this certificate from his master. Karl Sand belongs to the small number of those elect young men who are distinguished at once by the gifts of the mind and the faculties of the soul. In application and work, he surpasses all his fellow students, and this fact explains his rapid progress in all the philosophical and philological sciences. In mathematics, only there are still some further studies which he might pursue. The most affectionate wishes of his teacher follow him on his departure. From J. A. Keene, Rector and Master of the First Class, Richembourg, September 15, 1814. It was Sand's parents, especially his mother, who cultivated the fertile ground where his teachers sowed the seeds of learning. Sand knew this well. As he prepared for the University of Tübingen, where he intended to complete theological studies to become a pastor, he wrote to them, "I confess that, like all my brothers and sisters, I owe to you that beautiful and great part of my education, which I have seen lacking in most of those around me. Heaven alone can reward you with the conviction of having so nobly and grandly fulfilled your parental duties, amidst many others." After visiting his brother at St. Gall, Sand arrived in Tübingen. He had been drawn there primarily by Esquemer's reputation. He spent that winter quietly, his only notable incident being his admission into an association of students called the Teutonic Burschenschaft. Then came the spring of 1815, bringing the terrible news of Napoleon's landing in the Gulf of Juan. Immediately, all the youth of Germany capable of bearing arms once more rallied to the banners of 1813 and 1814. Sand followed this general example, but his action, unlike the enthusiasm of others, was the result of calm and deliberate resolution. He wrote to Wunsiedel on this occasion, April 22, 1813, "My dear parents, until now, you have found me submissive to your parental lessons and the advice of my excellent masters. Until now, I have striven to render myself worthy of the education God has sent me through you, and have applied myself to become capable of spreading the word of the Lord throughout my native land. For this reason, I can today sincerely declare to you the decision I have taken, assured that as tender and affectionate parents you will calm yourselves, and as German parents and patriots, you will praise my resolution rather than seek to dissuade me. The country once more calls for help, and this time the call is addressed to me, for now I have courage and strength. It cost me a great inward struggle, believe me, to abstain when in 1813 she gave her first cry. Only the conviction that thousands of others were then fighting and conquering for Germany, while I had to live for the peaceful calling to which I was destined, held me back. Now it is a question of preserving our newly re-established liberty, which in so many places has already yielded a rich harvest. The all-powerful and merciful Lord reserves for us this great trial, which will certainly be the last. It is for us, therefore, to show that we are worthy of the supreme gift He has given us, and capable of upholding it with strength and firmness. The danger to the country has never been as great as it is now. That is why, among the youth of Germany, the strong should support the wavering, that all may rise together. Our brave brothers in the north are already assembling from all parts under their banners. The state of Württemberg is proclaiming a general levy, and volunteers are coming in from every quarter, asking to die for their country. I consider it my duty, too, to fight for my country and for all the dear ones whom I love. If I were not profoundly convinced of this truth, I would not communicate my resolution to you. But my family is one that has a truly German heart, and would consider me a coward and an unworthy son if I did not follow this impulse. I certainly feel the greatness of the sacrifice. It costs me something, believe me, to leave my beautiful studies and put myself under the orders of common, uneducated people. But this only increases my courage in going to secure the liberty of my brothers. Moreover, once that liberty is secured, if God deigns to allow, I will return to carry them his word. I take leave, therefore, for a time of you, my most worthy parents, of my brothers, my sisters, and all who are dear to me. After mature deliberation, it seems most suitable for me to serve with the Bavarians. I shall enroll myself, for as long as the war may last, with a company of that nation. Farewell, then, live happily. Far away from you as I shall be, I shall follow your pious exhortations. In this new path, I shall still, I hope, remain pure before God, and I shall always try to walk in the path that rises above the things of earth and leads to those of heaven. Perhaps, in this career, the bliss of saving some souls from their fall may be reserved for me. Your dear image will always be about me. I will always have the Lord before my eyes and in my heart, so that I may joyfully endure the pains and fatigues of this holy war. Include me in your prayers. God will send you the hope of better times to help you in bearing the unhappy time in which we now are. We cannot see one another again soon, unless we conquer. And if we should be conquered, which God forbid, then my last wish, which I pray you, I conjure you to fulfill, my last and supreme wish, would be that you, my dear and deserving German relatives, should leave an enslaved country for some other not yet under the yoke. But why should we thus sadden one another's hearts? Is not our cause just and holy, and is not God just and holy? How then should we not be victors? You see that sometimes I doubt, so in your letters, which I am impatiently expecting, have pity on me and do not alarm my soul. For in any case, we shall meet again in another country, and that one will always be free and happy. I am, until death, your dutiful and grateful son, Karl Sand. These 2 lines by corner were written as a postscript. Perchance above our foeman lying dead we may behold the star of liberty. With this farewell to his parents, and with Corner's poems on his lips, Sand gave up his books. On May 10th, we find him in arms among the volunteer chasseurs, enrolled under the command of Major Falkenhausen, then stationed at Mannheim. Here he found his second brother, who had preceded him, and they underwent their drill together. Though Sand was not accustomed to great bodily fatigues, he endured those of the campaign with surprising strength. He refused all the alleviations his superiors tried to offer him, for he would allow no one to outdo him in his dedication to the good of the country. On the march, he invariably shared anything he possessed fraternally with his comrades, helping the weaker ones carry their burdens. Both priest and soldier, he sustained them with his words when he could do nothing more. On June 18th, at 8 in the evening, he arrived on the battlefield at Waterloo. On July 14th, he entered Paris. On December 18th, 1815, Karl Sand and his brother were back at Wunsiedel, to the great joy of their family. He spent the Christmas holidays and the end of the year with them. But his ardor for his new vocation did not allow him to remain longer, and on January 7th he reached Erlangen. To make up for lost time, he resolved to subject his day to fixed rules, writing down every evening what he had done since morning. This journal allows us to follow the young enthusiast, not only in his actions but also in his thoughts and the hesitations of his conscience. In it, we find his whole self, simple to naivete, enthusiastic to madness, gentle even to weakness toward others, severe even to asceticism toward himself. One of his great sorrows was the expense his education occasioned his parents. Every useless and costly pleasure left him with remorse. Thus, on February 9, 1816, he wrote, "I meant to go and visit my parents. Accordingly, I went to the Kummer's house, and there I was very amused. N. and T. began upon me with the everlasting jokes about Wunsiedel, that went on until 11 o'clock. But afterwards N. and T. began to torment me to go to the wine shop. I refused as long as I could. But as at last they seemed to think that it was from contempt of them that I would not go and drink a glass of Rhine wine with them, I did not dare resist longer. Unfortunately, they did not stop at Braunberger, and while my glass was still half full, N. ordered a bottle of champagne. When the first had disappeared, T. ordered a second. Then, even before this second bottle was drunk, both of them ordered a third in my name and in spite of me. I returned home quite giddy and threw myself on the sofa, where I slept for about an hour and only went to bed afterwards. Thus passed this shameful day, in which I have not thought enough of my kind and worthy parents, who are leading a poor and hard life, in which I allowed myself to be led away by the example of people who have money into spending 4 florins, an expenditure which was useless, and which would have kept the whole family for 2 days. Pardon me, my God, pardon me, I beseech thee, and receive the vow that I make never to fall into the same fault again. In future, I will live even more abstemiously than I usually do, so as to repair the fatal traces in my poor cash-box of my extravagance, and not to be obliged to ask for money from my mother before the day when she thinks of sending me some herself. Then, at the very time the poor young man reproached himself as if with a crime for having spent 4 florins, one of his cousins, a widow, died, leaving 3 orphan children. He immediately ran to offer comfort to the unhappy little creatures, entreating his mother to take charge of the youngest. Overjoyed at her answer, he thanked her thus: "For the very keen joy that you have given me by your letter, and for the very dear tone in which your soul speaks to me, bless you, O my mother. As I might have hoped and been sure, you have taken little Julius, and that fills me afresh with the deepest gratitude toward you. Rather than, in my constant trust in your goodness, I had already in her lifetime given our good little cousin the promise that you are fulfilling for me after her death." About March, Sand, though not truly ill, experienced an indisposition that required him to take the waters. His mother happened to be at the ironworks of Redwitz, some 12 or 15 miles from Wonsiedel, where mineral springs were found. Sand settled there with his mother. Despite his desire to avoid interrupting his work, the time spent on baths, dinner invitations, and even the walks his health required, disrupted his usual routine and awakened his remorse. Thus, we find these lines in his journal for April 13th. "Life, without some high aim toward which all thoughts and actions tend, is an empty desert. My day yesterday is proof of this. I spent it with my own people, and that, of course, was a great pleasure to me. But how did I spend it? In continual eating, so that when I wanted to work, I could do nothing worth doing. Full of indolence and slackness, I dragged myself into the company of 2 or 3 sets of people, and came from them in the same state of mind as I went to them. For these expeditions, Sand used a little chestnut horse belonging to his brother, of which he was very fond. This small horse had been bought with great difficulty, for, as we have said, the whole family was poor. The following note, in relation to the animal, gives an idea of Sand's simple heart. April 19th. Today I have been very happy at the ironworks, and very industrious beside my kind mother. In the evening, I came home on the little chestnut. Since the day before yesterday, when he got a strain and hurt his foot, he has been very restive and very touchy. When he got home, he refused his food. I thought at first that he did not fancy his fodder, and gave him some pieces of sugar and sticks of cinnamon, which he likes very much. He tasted them, but would not eat them. The poor little beast seems to have some other internal indisposition besides his injured foot. If by ill luck he were to become foundered or ill, everybody, even my parents, would throw the blame on me, and yet I have been very careful and considerate of him. My God, my Lord, thou who can't do things both great and small, remove from me this misfortune, and let him recover as quickly as possible. If, however, thou hast willed otherwise, and if this fresh trouble is to fall upon us, I will try to bear it with courage, and as the expiation of some sin. Meanwhile, O my God, I leave this matter in thy hands, as I leave my life and my soul." On April 20th he wrote, "The little horse is well, God has helped me." German manners and customs were so different, and contrasts occurred so frequently in the same person across the Rhine, that anything less than these accounts would be insufficient to convey a true idea of Sand's character. It was a blend of artlessness and reason, childishness and strength, depression and enthusiasm, material details and poetic ideas, rendering him a man somewhat incomprehensible to us. We will now continue his portrait, which still needs a few finishing touches. When he returned to Erlangen after completing his cure, Sand read Faust for the first time. Initially, he was amazed by the work, which seemed to him an orgy of genius. Then, having finished it entirely, he reconsidered his first impression and wrote, May 4th. Oh, horrible struggle of man and devil! What Mephistopheles is in me I feel for the first time in this hour, and I feel it, O God, with consternation. About 11 at night I finished reading the tragedy, and I felt and saw the fiend in myself, so that by midnight, Amid my tears and despair, I was at last frightened at myself. Sand gradually fell into a deep melancholy, from which nothing could rouse him except his desire to purify and preach morality to the students around him. To anyone familiar with university life, such a task would seem superhuman. Sand, however, was not discouraged. If he could not influence everyone, he at least succeeded in forming around him a considerable circle of the most intelligent and the best. Nevertheless, amidst these apostolic labors, strange longings for death would overcome him. He seemed to recall heaven and longed to return to it, calling these temptations homesickness for the soul's country. His favorite authors were Lessing, Schiller, Herder, and Goethe. After rereading the last two for the 20th time, he wrote, "Good and evil touch each other. The woes of the young Werther and Weislingen's seduction are almost the same story. No matter, we must not judge between what is good and what is evil in others, for that is what God will do." I have just been spending much time over this thought, and have become convinced that in no circumstances ought we to allow ourselves to seek for the devil in others, and that we have no right to judge. The only creature over whom we have received the power to judge and condemn is ourself, and that gives us enough constant care, business, and trouble. I have again today felt a profound desire to quit this world and enter a higher world, but this desire is rather dejection than strength, a lassitude than an upsoaring. Sand spent the year 1816 in these pious attempts with his young comrades, in ceaseless self-examination, and in the perpetual battle against the desire for death that pursued him. Each day, his self-doubt deepened. On January 1st, 1817, he wrote this prayer in his diary: "Grant to me, O Lord, to me whom thou hast endowed, in sending me on earth, with free will, the grace that in this year which we are now beginning, I may never relax this constant attention, and not shamefully give up the examination of my conscience which I have hitherto made. Give me strength to increase the attention which I turn upon my own life, and to diminish that which I turn upon the life of others. Strengthen my will that it may become powerful to command the desires of the body and the waverings of the soul. Give me a pious conscience entirely devoted to thy celestial kingdom, that I may always belong to thee, or after failing, may be able to return to thee." Sand was right to pray to God for the year 1817, and his fears were a premonition. The skies of Germany, brightened by Leipzig and Waterloo, were once more darkened. The colossal despotism of Napoleon was succeeded by the individual oppression of the small princes who made up the Germanic Diet. All that the nations had gained by overthrowing the giant was to be governed by dwarfs. This was the time when secret societies organized throughout Germany. Let us say a few words about them, for the history we are writing is not only that of individuals, but also that of nations. Each time the occasion presents itself, we will give our picture a wider horizon. The secret societies of Germany, of which we have all heard without knowing them well, seem, when traced back, to originate in some affiliation with the famous clubs of the Illuminati and the Freemasons. These societies had caused such a stir in France at the close of the 18th century. At the time of the 1789 Revolution, these various philosophical, political, and religious sects enthusiastically accepted Republican doctrines. The successes of France's first generals have often been attributed to the secret efforts of their members. When Bonaparte, who was acquainted with these groups and was even said to have belonged to them, exchanged his general's uniform for an emperor's cloak, all of them considered him a renegade and traitor. They not only rose against him at home, but tried to raise enemies against him abroad. As they appealed to noble and generous passions, they found a response. Princes to whom their results might be profitable seemed for a moment to encourage them. Among others, Prince Louis of Prussia was Grand Master of one of these societies. The attempted murder by Staps, to which we have already referred, was one of the thunderclaps of the storm. But its aftermath brought the Peace of Vienna, and the degradation of Austria dealt a death blow to the old Germanic organization. These societies, which had received a mortal wound in 1806 and were now controlled by the French police, were forced to seek new members in secret instead of continuing to meet in public. In 1811, several agents of these societies were arrested in Berlin. However, the Prussian authorities, following secret orders from Queen Louisa, actually protected them, allowing them to easily deceive the French police about their intentions. About February 1815, The disasters of the French army revived the courage of these societies, for it was seen that God was helping their cause. Students, in particular, enthusiastically joined the new attempts that were now beginning. Many colleges enrolled almost entirely, choosing their principals and professors as captains. The poet, Korner, killed on October 18th at Leipzig, became the hero of this campaign. The triumph of this national movement, which twice carried the Prussian army, largely composed of volunteers, to Paris, was followed by a terrible reaction in Germany when the treaties of 1815 and the new Germanic constitution were made known. All these young men who, exiled by their princes, had risen in the name of liberty, soon perceived that they had been used as tools to establish European despotism. They wished to claim the promises that had been made, but the policies of Talleyrand and Metternich weighed on them. Repressing them at their first words, these policies compelled them to shelter their discontent and their hopes in the universities, which, enjoying a kind of constitution of their own, more easily escaped the investigations made by the spies of the Holy Alliance. But, repressed as they were, these societies continued to exist, maintaining communications through traveling students. These students, bearing verbal messages, traversed Germany under the pretense of botanizing, and passing from mountain to mountain, sowed and broadcast those luminous and hopeful words of which peoples are always eager and kings always fear. We have seen that Sand, carried away by the general movement, had gone through the campaign of 1815 as a volunteer, although he was then only 19 years old. On his return, he, like others, found his golden hopes deceived, and it is from this period that his journal takes on the tone of mysticism and sadness our readers must have noticed. He soon entered one of these associations, the Teutonia. From that moment, regarding the great cause he had taken up as a religious one, he attempted to make the conspirators worthy of their enterprise. Thus arose his efforts to inculcate moral doctrines, in which he succeeded with some, but failed with the majority. Sand had, however, succeeded in forming around him a certain circle of Puritans, composed of about 60 to 80 students. All belonged to the Burschenschaft group, which continued its political and religious course despite the jeers of the opposing Landmannschaft group. One of his friends, Dittmar, and he were effectively the chiefs. Although no election had given them their authority, they exercised so much influence on what was decided that in any particular case, their fellow adepts were sure to spontaneously obey any impulse they might choose to impart. The meetings of the Burschen took place upon a little hill crowned by a ruined castle, located at some distance from Erlangen. Sand and Dittmar had called this spot the Rutli, in memory of where Walter Fürst, Melchthal, and Stauffacher had made their vow to deliver their country. There, under the pretense of student games, while they built up a new house with the ruined fragments, they passed alternately from symbol to action and from action to symbol. Meanwhile, the association's growth across Germany began to alarm not only the German Confederation's princes and kings, but also the great European powers. France dispatched agents for reports, and Russia paid agents on the ground. Persecutions that affected a professor or exasperated an entire university often stemmed from a note sent by the cabinets of the Tuileries or St. Petersburg. Amid these unfolding events, Sand began the year 1817, commending himself to God's protection. He remained in the sad mood we have observed, driven more by a disgust for the present state of affairs than for life itself. On May 8th, consumed by this unconquerable melancholy, born of his political disappointments, he wrote in his diary, "I shall find it impossible to set seriously to work. This idle temper, this humor of hypochondria which casts its black veil over everything in life, continues and grows in spite of the moral activity I imposed on myself yesterday." During the holidays, fearing to burden his parents with additional expense, he chose not to go home. Instead, he preferred a walking tour with his friends. No doubt this tour, beyond its recreational aspect, held a political aim. Sand's diary, however, records nothing but the names of the towns they passed through during this journey. To illustrate Sand's dutifulness, it should be noted that he did not depart until he had obtained his mother's permission. Upon their return, Sand, Dittmar, and their Burschen friends found their Rutli sacked by their enemies, the Landmannschaft. The house they had built was demolished and its fragments scattered. Sand took this event as an omen and was greatly depressed by it. "It seems to me, oh my God," he wrote in his journal, "that everything swims and turns around me. My soul grows darker and darker. My moral strength diminishes instead of growing. I work and cannot achieve, walk toward my aim and do not reach it, exhaust myself and do nothing great. The days of life flee one after another. Cares and uneasiness increase. I see no haven anywhere for our sacred German cause. The end will be that we shall fall, for I myself waver. O Lord and Father, protect me, save me, and lead me to that land from which we are forever driven back by the indifference of wavering spirits. Around this time, a terrible event struck Sand to the heart. His friend Dittmar drowned. This is what Sand wrote in his diary on the very morning of the occurrence. "Oh, Almighty God, what is going to become of me? For the last fortnight, I have been drawn into disorder, and have not been able to compel myself to look fixedly either backward or forward in my life, so that from the 4th of June up to the present hour my journal has remained empty. Yet every day I might have had occasion to praise Thee, O my God, but my soul is in anguish. Lord, do not turn from me. The more obstacles, the more strength there is of strength." In the evening, he added these few words to his morning entry: "Desolation, despair, and death over my friend, over my very deeply loved Dittmar." This letter, which he wrote to his family, recounts the tragic event. "You know that when my best friends A, C, and Z were gone, I became particularly intimate with my well-beloved Dittmar of Ansbach. Dittmar, that is to say, a true and worthy German, an evangelical Christian, something more, in short, than a man. An angelic soul, always turned toward the good, serene, pious, and ready for action. He had come to live in a room next to mine in Professor Grunler's house. We loved each other, upheld each other in our efforts, and for better or worse, bore our good or ill fortune in common. On this last spring evening, after having worked in his room, and having strengthened ourselves anew to resist all the torments of life, and to advance toward the aim that we desired to attain, we went, about 7 in the evening, to the baths of Redwitz. A very black storm was rising in the sky, but only as yet appeared on the horizon. E, who was with us, proposed to go home, but Dittmar persisted, saying that the canal was but a few steps away. God permitted that it should not be I who replied with these fatal words. So he went on. The sunset was splendid. I see it still, its violet clouds all fringed with gold, for I remember the smallest details of that evening. Dittmar went down first. He was the only one of us who knew how to swim, so he walked before us to show us the depth. The water was about up to our chests, and he who preceded us was up to his shoulders, when he warned us not to go farther, because he was ceasing to feel the bottom. He immediately gave up his footing and began to swim. But scarcely had he made 10 strokes when, having reached the place where the river separates into 2 branches, he uttered a cry, and as he was trying to get a foothold, disappeared. We ran at once to the bank, hoping to be able to help him more easily, but we had neither poles nor ropes within reach, and as I have told you, neither of us could swim. Then we called for help with all our might. At that moment, Dittmar reappeared, and by an unheard of effort, seized the end of a willow branch that was hanging over the water. But the branch was not strong enough to resist, and our friend sank again, as though he had been struck by apoplexy. Can you imagine the state in which we were, we as friends, bending over the river, our fixed and haggard eyes trying to pierce its depth? My God, how is it we did not go mad? A great crowd, however, had rung at our cries. For 2 hours they sought for him with boats and drag hooks, and at last they succeeded in drawing his body from the gulf. Yesterday, we bore it solemnly to the field of rest. Thus, with the end of this spring, has begun the serious summer of my life. I greeted it in a grave and melancholy mood, and you behold me now, if not consoled, at least strengthened by religion, which, thanks to the merits of Christ, gives me the assurance of meeting my friend in heaven, from the heights of which he will inspire me with strength to support the trials of this life. And now I do not desire anything more except to know you free from all anxiety in regard to me. Instead of uniting the 2 groups of students in common grief, this accident only intensified their hatred for each other. Among the first people who ran up at the cries of Sand and his companion was a member of the Burschenschaft who could swim. But instead of going to Dittmar's assistance, he exclaimed, "It seems that we shall get rid of one of these dogs of Burschen, thank God." Despite this manifestation of hatred, which indeed might be that of an individual and not of the whole body, the Burschen invited their enemies to Dittmar's funeral. a brutal refusal, and a threat to disturb the ceremony with insults to the corpse formed their sole reply. The Burschen then warned the authorities, who took suitable measures, and all Dittmar's friends followed his coffin, sword in hand. Beholding this calm but resolute demonstration, the Burschenschaft did not dare to carry out their threat, and contented themselves with insulting the procession with laughs and songs. Sand wrote in his journal, "Dittmar is a great loss to all of us, and particularly to me. He gave me the overflow of his strength and life. He stopped, as it were, with an embankment, the part of my character that is irresolute and undecided. From him it is that I have learned not to dread the approaching storm, and to know how to fight and die." Some days after the funeral, Sand had a quarrel about Dittmar with one of his former friends, who had switched from the Burschen to the Burschenschaft, and who had made himself conspicuous at the funeral by his indecent hilarity. It was decided they should fight the next day, and on the same day Sand wrote in his journal, "Tomorrow I am to fight with PG. Yet thou knowest, O my God, what great friends we formerly were, except for a certain mistrust with which his coldness always inspired me. But on this occasion, his odious conduct has caused me to descend from the tenderest pity to the profoundest hatred. My God, do not withdraw thy hand either from him or from me, since we are both fighting like men. Judge only by our two causes, and give the victory to that which is the more just. If thou shouldst call me before thy supreme tribunal, I know very well that I should appear burdened with an eternal malediction. And indeed it is not upon myself that I reckon, but upon the merits of our Savior Jesus Christ. Come what may, be praised and blessed, O my God. My dear parents, brothers, and friends, I commend you to the protection of God." Sand waited in vain for 2 hours the next day. His adversary did not come to the meeting place. The loss of Dittmar, however, by no means produced the result on Sand that might have been expected, and that he himself seemed to indicate in the regrets he expressed for him. Deprived of that strong soul upon which he rested, Sand understood that it was his task, by redoubled energy, to make Dittmar's death less fatal to his party. Indeed, he continued single-handedly the work of recruiting they had been carrying on together, and the patriotic conspiracy was not for a moment impeded. The holidays arrived, and Sand left Erlangen, never to return. From Wonsiedel, he was to proceed to Jena to complete his theological studies there. After some days spent with his family, indicated in his journal as happy, Sand went to his new place of abode, where he arrived some time before the festival of the Wartburg. This festival, established to celebrate the anniversary of the Battle of Leipzig, was regarded as a solemnity throughout Germany. Although the princes knew well that it was a center for the annual renewal of affiliation to various societies, they dared not forbid it. Indeed, the manifesto of the Teutonic Association was exhibited at this festival and signed by more than 2,000 deputies from different universities in Germany. This was a day of joy for Sand, for he found a great number of old friends amidst new ones. The government, however, which had not dared to attack the association by force, resolved to undermine it by public opinion. De Storen published a terrible document, attacking the societies and founded, it was said, upon information furnished by Kotzebue. This publication caused a great stir, not only at Jena but throughout all Germany. Here is the trace of this event that we find in Sand's journal. November 24th. Today, after working with much ease and assiduity, I went out about 4 with E. As we crossed the marketplace, we heard Kotzebue's new and venomous insult read. By what fury that man is possessed against the Burschen and against all who love Germany. Thus, for the first time and in these terms, Sand's journal presents the name of the man who, 18 months later, he was to slay. On the 29th, in the evening, Sand wrote again. Tomorrow I shall set out courageously and joyfully from this place for a pilgrimage to Wonsiedel. There I shall find my large-hearted mother and my tender sister Julia. There I shall cool my head and warm my heart. Probably I shall be present at my good Fritz's marriage with Louisa, and at the baptism of my very dear Durchmitha's firstborn. God, O my Father, as thou hast been with me during my sad course, be with me still on my happy road. This journey did, in fact, greatly cheer Sand. Since Dittmar's death, his attacks of hypochondria had disappeared. While Dittmar lived, he might die. Dittmar being dead, it was his part to live. On December 11th, he left Wonsiedel to return to Jena, and on the 31st of the same month, he wrote this prayer in his journal. O merciful Savior, I began this year with prayer, and in these last days I have been subject to distraction and ill disposition. When I look backward, I find, alas, that I have not become better, but I have entered more profoundly into life, and should occasion present, I now feel strength to act. It is because Thou hast always been with me, Lord, even when I was not with Thee. If our readers have followed with some attention the different extracts from the journal that we have placed before them, they must have seen Sand's resolution gradually growing stronger and his mind becoming excited. From the beginning of the year 1818, one feels his view, which was long timid and wandering, taking in a wider horizon and fixing itself on a nobler aim. He is no longer ambitious of the pastor's simple life or of the narrow influence he might gain in a small community, which, in his youthful modesty, had seemed the height of good fortune and happiness. It is now his native land, his German people, nay, all humanity, which he embraces in his gigantic plans of political regeneration. Thus, on the flyleaf of his journal for the year 1818, he wrote, "Lord, let me strengthen myself in the idea that I have conceived of the deliverance of humanity by the holy sacrifice of Thy Son. Grant that I may be a Christ of Germany, and that, like and through Jesus, I may be strong and patient in suffering." But Kotzebue's anti-republican pamphlets increased in number and gained a fatal influence upon the minds of rulers. Nearly all the persons attacked in these pamphlets were known and esteemed at Jena. One can easily comprehend what effects such insults produced upon these young heads and noble hearts, which carried conviction to the point of blindness and enthusiasm to that of fanaticism. Thus, here is what Sand wrote in his diary on May 5th. "Lord, what causes this melancholy anguish which has again taken possession of me? But a firm and constant will surmount everything, and the idea of the country gives joy and courage to the saddest and the weakest. When I think of that, I am always amazed that none among us is found courageous enough to drive a knife into the breast of Kotzebue or any other traitor." Still dominated by the same thought, he continued on May 18th. "A man is nothing in comparison with a nation. He is a unity compared with millions, a minute compared with a century. A man, whom nothing precedes and nothing follows, is born, lives, and dies in a longer or shorter time, which, relative to eternity, hardly equals the duration of a lightning flash. A nation, on the contrary, is immortal." From time to time, however, amidst these thoughts, which bore the impression of the political fate driving him toward bloodshed, the kindly and joyous youth reappeared. On June 24th, he wrote to his mother, "I have received your long and beautiful letter, accompanied by the very complete and well-chosen outfit which you sent me. The sight of this fine linen gave me back one of the joys of my childhood. These are fresh benefits. My prayers never remain unfulfilled, and I have continual cause to thank you and God. I receive, all at once, shirts, 2 pairs of fine sheets, a present of your work, and of Julia's and Caroline's work, dainties and sweetmeats, so that I am still jumping with joy, and I turned on my heels when I opened the little parcel. Receive the thanks of my heart, and share as giver in the joy of him who has received. Today, however, is a very serious day, the last day of spring, and the anniversary of that on which I lost my noble and good Dittmar. I am a prey to 1,000 different and confused feelings, but I have only 2 passions left in me which remain upright, and like 2 pillars of brass support this whole chaos, the thought of God and the love of my country." During all this time, Sand's life remained apparently calm and even. The inward storm was calmed. He rejoiced in his application to work and his cheerful temper. However, from time to time, he made great complaints to himself about his propensity for dainty food, which he did not always find it possible to conquer. Then, in his self-contempt, he called himself fig stomach or cake stomach. But amidst all this, the religious and political exaltation continued. He visited all the battlefields near the road he followed. On October 18th, he was back at Jena, where he resumed his studies with more application than ever. It was amidst such university studies that the year 1818 closed for him, and we would hardly suspect the terrible resolution he had taken, were it not that we find in his journal this last note, dated December 31st. "I finished the last day of this year 1818, then, in a serious and solemn mood. I have decided that the Christmas feast which has just gone by will be the last Christmas feast that I shall celebrate. If anything is to come of our efforts, if the cause of humanity is to assume the upper hand in our country, If in this faithless epoch any noble feelings can spring up afresh and make way, it can only happen if the wretch, the traitor, the seducer of youth, the infamous Kotzebue falls. I am fully convinced of this, and until I have accomplished the work upon which I have resolved, I shall have no rest. Lord, Thou who knowest that I have devoted my life to this great action, I only need, now that it is fixed in my mind, to beg for the true firmness and courage of soul. Here Sand's diary ends. He had begun it to strengthen himself. He had reached his aim. He needed nothing more. From this moment, he was occupied by nothing but this single idea, and he continued slowly to mature the plan in his head to familiarize himself with its execution. But all the impressions arising from this thought remained in his own mind, and none were manifested outwardly. To everyone else, he was the same. However, for some time past, a complete and unaltered serenity, accompanied by a visible and cheerful return of inclination toward life, had been noticed in him. He had made no change in the hours or duration of his studies, but he had begun to attend anatomical classes very assiduously. One day, he was seen to give even more than his customary attention to a lesson in which the professor was demonstrating the various functions of the heart. He examined with the greatest care the place it occupied in the chest, asking to have some of the demonstrations repeated 2 or 3 times. When he left, he questioned some of the young men following medical courses about the susceptibility of the organ, which cannot receive even a slight blow without death ensuing. All this was done with such perfect indifference and calmness that no one around him conceived any suspicion. Another day one of his friends, came into his room. Sand, who had heard him coming up, was standing by the table, with a paper knife in his hand, waiting for him. Directly the visitor came in, Sand flung himself upon him, struck him lightly on the forehead, and then, as he put up his hands to ward off the blow, struck him rather more violently in the chest. Then, satisfied with this experiment, he said, "You see, when you want to kill a man, that is the way to do it. You threaten the face, he puts up his hands, and while he does so you thrust a dagger into his heart." The 2 young men laughed heartily over this murderous demonstration, and A.S. related it that evening at the wine shop as one of the peculiarities of character that were common in his friend. After the event, the pantomime explained itself. March arrived. Sand became calmer, more affectionate, and kinder. It might be thought that, in the moment of leaving his friends forever, he wished to leave them an ineffaceable remembrance of him. At last he announced that, on account of several family affairs, he was about to undertake a little journey. He set about all his preparations with his usual care, but with a serenity never previously seen in him. Up to that time, he had continued to work as usual, not relaxing for an instant, for there was a possibility that Kotzebue might die or be killed by somebody else before the term that Sand had fixed for himself, and in that case he did not wish to have lost time. On March 7th, he invited all his friends to spend the evening with him, and announced his departure for the next day but one, the 9th. All of them then proposed to him to escort him for some leagues, but Sand refused. He feared lest this demonstration, innocent though it were, might compromise them later on. He set forth alone, therefore, after having hired his lodgings for another half-year, in order to obviate any suspicion. He went by way of Erfurt and Eisenach, in order to visit Wartburg. From that place, he went to Frankfurt, where he slept on the 17th, and in the morning he continued his journey by way of Darmstadt. At last, on the 23rd, at 9 in the morning, he arrived at the top of the little hill where we found him at the beginning of this narrative. Throughout the journey, he had been the amiable and happy young man whom no one could see without liking. Having reached Mannheim, he took a room at the Weinberg and wrote his name as Henry in the visitors' list. He immediately inquired where Kotzebue lived. The counselor dwelt near the church of the Jesuits. His house was at the corner of a street, and though Sand's informants could not tell him exactly the letter, they assured him it was not possible to mistake the house. At Mannheim, houses are marked by letters, not by numbers. Sand went at once to Kotzebue's house. It was about 10 o'clock. He was told that the counselor went to walk for an hour or 2 every morning in the park of Mannheim. Sand inquired about the path in which he generally walked, and about the clothes he wore, for never having seen him, he could only recognize him by the description. Kotzebue chanced to take another path. Sand walked about the park for an hour, but seeing no one who corresponded to the description given him, went back to the house. Kotzebue had come in, but was at breakfast and could not see him. Sand went back to Weinberg and sat down at the midday table d'hôte, where he dined with an appearance of such calmness, and even of such happiness, that his conversation, which was now lively, now simple, and now dignified, was remarked upon by everybody. At 5 in the afternoon, he returned a third time to the house of Kotzebue, who was giving a great dinner that day. But orders had been given to admit Sand. He was shown into a little room opening out of the anteroom, and a moment after, Kotzebue came in. Sand then performed the drama he had rehearsed upon his friend A.S. Kotzebue, finding his face threatened, put his hands up to it, and left his breast exposed. Sand at once stabbed him to the heart. Kotzebue gave one cry, staggered, and fell back into an armchair. He was dead. At the cry, a little girl of 6 years old ran in, one of those charming German children, with cherubic faces, blue-eyed, with long flowing hair. She flung herself upon Kotzebue's body, calling her father with piercing cries. Sand, standing at the door, could not endure this sight. Without going farther, he thrust the dagger, still covered with Kotzebue's blood, up to the hilt into his own breast. Then, seeing to his surprise that, notwithstanding the terrible wound he had just given himself, he did not feel the approach of death, and not wishing to fall alive into the hands of the servants who were running in, he rushed to the staircase. The invited guests were just coming in. They, seeing a young man, pale and bleeding, with a knife in his breast, uttered loud cries, and stood aside instead of stopping him. Sand therefore passed down the staircase and reached the street below. 10 paces off, a patrol was passing, on the way to relieve the sentinels at the castle. Sand thought these men had been summoned by the cries that followed him. He threw himself on his knees in the middle of the street and said, "Father, receive my soul." Then, drawing the knife from the wound, he gave himself a second blow below the former, and fell insensible. Sand was carried to the hospital and guarded with the utmost strictness. The wounds were serious, but, thanks to the skill of the physicians who were called in, were not mortal. One of them even healed eventually. But as to the second, the blade having gone between the costal pleura and the pulmonary pleura, an effusion of blood occurred between the 2 layers, so that, instead of closing the wound, it was kept carefully open, in order that the extravasated blood might be drawn off every morning by means of a pump, as is done in the operation for empyema. Notwithstanding these cares, Sand was for 3 months between life and death. When on March 26th, the news of Kotzebue's assassination came from Mannheim to Jena, the academic senate caused Sand's room to be opened. They found 2 letters, one addressed to his friends of the Burschenschaft, in which he declared that he no longer belonged to their society, since he did not wish that their brotherhood should include a man about to die on the scaffold. The other letter, which bore this superscription, "To my nearest and dearest," was an exact account of what he meant to do and the motives which had made him determined upon this act. Though the letter is a little long, it is so solemn and so ancient in spirit that we do not hesitate to present it in its entirety to our readers. To all my own loyal and eternally cherished souls, why add still further to your sadness? I asked myself, and I hesitated to write to you, but my silence would have wounded the religion of the heart. And the deeper a grief, the more it needs, before it can be blotted out, to drain to the dregs its cup of bitterness. Forth from my agonized breast, then, forth, long and cruel torment of a last conversation, which alone, however, when sincere, can alleviate the pain of parting. This letter brings you the last farewell of your son and your brother. The greatest misfortune of life for any generous heart is to see the cause of God stopped short in its developments by our fault. And the most dishonoring infamy would be to suffer that the fine things acquired bravely by thousands of men, and for which thousands of men have joyfully sacrificed themselves, should be no more than a transient dream, without real and positive consequences. The resurrection of our German life was begun in these last 20 years, and particularly in the sacred year 1813, with a courage inspired by God. But now the house of our fathers is shaken from the summit to the base. Forward! Let us raise it, new and fair, and such as the true temple of the true God should be. Small is the number of those who resist, and who wish to oppose themselves as a dike against the torrent of the progress of higher humanity among the German people. Why should vast whole masses bow beneath the yoke of a perverse minority? And why, scarcely healed, should we fall back into a worse disease than that which we are leaving behind? Many of these seducers, and those are the most infamous, are playing the game of corruption with us. Among them is Kotzebue, the most cunning and the worst of all, a real talking machine emitting all sorts of detestable speech and pernicious advice. His voice is skillful in removing from us all anger and bitterness against the most unjust measures, and is just such as kings require to put us to sleep again in that old hazy slumber which is the death of nations. Every day he odiously betrays his country, and nevertheless, despite his treason, remains an idol for half Germany, which, dazzled by him, accepts unresisting the poison poured out by him in his periodic pamphlets, wrapped up and protected as he is by the seductive mantle of a great poetic reputation. Incited by him, the princes of Germany, who have forgotten their promises, will allow nothing free or good to be accomplished. Or if anything of the kind is accomplished in spite of them, they will league themselves with the French to annihilate it. That the history of our time may not be covered with eternal ignominy, it is necessary that he should fall. I have always maintained that if we seek a profound remedy for our current state of degradation, no one must shy away from struggle or suffering. The true liberty of the German people will only be secured when every good citizen commits something vital to the cause. Every true son of this country, prepared to fight for justice, must disdain worldly possessions and desire only the heavenly rewards that death promises. Who then will confront this miserable hireling, this venal traitor? For a long time, I, who was not born for murder, have waited in fear, in prayer, and in tears for someone else to act before me. I hoped someone would liberate me, allowing me to continue on the sweet, peaceful path I had chosen. Yet, despite my prayers and tears, the one who should strike does not appear. Indeed, every man like myself believes someone else will act. This constant waiting, this delay, only worsens our condition. At any moment, and what deep shame that would be for us, Kotzebue might leave Germany unpunished, taking to Russia the riches for which he traded his honor, his conscience, and his German name. Who can save us from this disgrace if every man, if I myself, do not feel the strength to become the chosen instrument of God's justice? Therefore forward! It shall be I who courageously confronts him. Do not be alarmed, him, the loathsome deceiver. It shall be I who kills the traitor, so that his misleading voice, once silenced, will cease to lead us astray from the lessons of history and the Spirit of God. An irresistible and solemn duty compels me to this deed, ever since I recognized the high destinies the German nation may achieve this century, and ever since I came to know the coward and hypocrite who alone prevents it. For me, as for every German seeking the public good, this desire has become a strict and binding necessity. May I, through this national vengeance, show all upright and loyal consciences where the true danger lies, and save our vilified and slandered societies from the imminent threat they face. May I, in short, spread terror among the cowardly and wicked, and courage and faith among the good. Speeches and writings lead to nothing, only actions work. I will act, therefore. Though violently diverted from my bright dreams of the future, I am nonetheless full of trust in God. I even experience a celestial joy, now that, like the Hebrews seeking the promised land, I see traced before me, through darkness and death, the path at the end of which I shall have paid my debt to my country. Farewell, then, faithful hearts. It is true, this early separation is hard. True, your hopes, like my wishes, are disappointed. But let us be consoled by the primary thought that we have done what the voice of our country called upon us to do. You know that is the principle by which I have always lived. You will doubtless say among yourselves, yes, thanks to our sacrifices, he had learned to know life and taste the joys of earth, and he seemed deeply to love his native country and the humble estate to which he was called. Alas, yes, that is true. Under your protection, and amidst your countless sacrifices, my native land and life had become profoundly dear to me. Yes, thanks to you, I have entered the Eden of knowledge and lived the free life of thought. Thanks to you, I have looked into history and then returned to my own conscience, to anchor myself to the solid pillars of faith in the eternal. Yes, I was to pass gently through this life as a preacher of the gospel. Yes, in my steadfastness to my calling, I was to be sheltered from the storms of this existence. But would that suffice to avert the danger threatening Germany? And you yourselves, in your infinite love, should you not rather urge me to risk my life for the good of all? So many modern Greeks have already fallen to free their country from the Turkish yoke, dying almost without result or hope. Yet thousands of new martyrs maintain their courage and are ready to fall in their turn. Should I then hesitate to die? You will not believe that I fail to recognize your love, or that your love is but a trifling consideration for me. What else should compel me to die if not my devotion to you and to Germany, and the need to prove this devotion to my family and my country? You, mother, will say, why have I raised a son whom I loved and who loved me, for whom I have endured 1,000 cares and toils, who, thanks to my prayers and my example, was susceptible to good influences, and from whom, after my long and weary journey, I hope to receive the same care I gave him? Why does he now abandon me? Oh, my kind and tender mother! Yes, you will perhaps say that. But could not the mother of anyone else say the same, and everything resolve itself in words when action is needed for the country? And if no one would act, what would become of that mother of us all who is called Germany? But no, such complaints are far from you, noble woman. I understood your appeal once before. And at this present hour, if no one came forward for the German cause, you yourself would urge me to the fight. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters before me, all noble and loyal. They will remain with you, mother. And besides, you will have as sons all the children of Germany who love their country. Every man has a destiny to fulfill. Mine is dedicated to the action I am about to undertake. If I were to live another 50 years, I could not live more happily than I have lately. Farewell, mother. I commend you to the protection of God. May he raise you to a joy that misfortunes can no longer trouble. Take your grandchildren, to whom I would have loved to be a loving friend, to the top of our beautiful mountains soon. There, on that altar raised by the Lord himself in the midst of Germany, let them dedicate themselves, swearing to take up the sword as soon as they have strength to lift it, and to lay it down only when our brethren are all united in liberty, when all Germans, with a liberal constitution, are great before the Lord, powerful against their neighbors, and united among themselves. May my country forever raise her happy gaze to you, Almighty Father. May your blessing fall abundantly upon her harvests ready to be cut, and her armies ready for battle. Recognizing the blessings you have showered upon us, may the German nation ever be first among nations to rise and uphold the cause of humanity, which is your image upon earth. Your eternally attached son, brother, and friend, Karl-Ludwig Sand. Jena, early March, 1819. Sand, who had initially been taken to the hospital, was moved 3 months later to the prison at Mannheim. There, the governor, Mr. G., had a room prepared for him. He remained 2 more months in a state of extreme weakness. His left arm was completely paralyzed. His voice was very weak. Every movement caused him horrible pain. Thus, it was not until August 11th, 5 months after the event we narrated, that he was able to write to his family. My very dear parents, the Grand Duke's Commission of Inquiry informed me yesterday that I might have the intense joy of a visit from you, and that I might perhaps see you here and embrace you, mother, and some of my brothers and sisters. Without being surprised by this fresh proof of your motherly love, I have felt an ardent memory reawakened of the happy life we spent gently together. Joy and grief, desire and sacrifice, violently agitate my heart. I have had to weigh these various impulses against each other, with the force of reason, to regain mastery of myself and make a decision regarding my wishes. The balance has inclined towards sacrifice. You know, mother, how much joy and courage a look from your eyes, daily interaction with you, and your pious and high-minded conversation might bring me during my very short time. But you also know my position, and you are too well acquainted with the natural course of all these painful inquiries, not to feel as I do, that such annoyance, continually recurring, would greatly trouble the pleasure of our companionship, if it did not indeed succeed in entirely destroying it. Then, mother, after the long and fatiguing journey you would be obliged to make to see me, think of the terrible sorrow of the farewell when the moment came to part in this world. Let us therefore abide by the sacrifice, according to God's will, and let us yield ourselves only to that sweet community of thought which distance cannot interrupt, in which I find my only joys, and which, in spite of men, will always be granted us by the Lord our Father. As for my physical state, I know nothing about it. You see, however, since at last I am writing to you myself, that I have overcome my first uncertainties. For the rest, I know too little of the structure of my own body to give any opinion, as to what my wounds may determine for it. Except that a little strength has returned to me, its state is still the same, and I endure it calmly and patiently, for God comes to my help and gives me courage and firmness. He will help me, believe me, to find all the joys of the soul and to be strong in mind. Amen. May you live happily. Your deeply respectful son, Karl-Ludwig Sand. A month after this letter, tender answers came from all the family. We will quote only that of Sand's mother, because it completes the idea which the reader may have already formed of this great-hearted woman, as her son always calls her. Dear, inexpressibly dear Karl, how sweet it was to me to see the writing of your beloved hand after so long a time. No journey would have been so painful, and no road so long, as to prevent me from coming to you. I would go, in deep and infinite love, to any end of the earth in the mere hope of catching sight of you. But as I well know both your tender affection and your profound anxiety for me, and as you give me, so firmly and upon such manly reflection, reasons against which I can say nothing, and which I can but honor, it shall be, my well-beloved Karl, as you have wished and decided. We will continue, without speech, to communicate our thoughts. But be satisfied, nothing can separate us. I enfold you in my soul, and my material thoughts watch over you. May this infinite love which upholds us, strengthens us, and leads us all to a better life, preserve, dear Karl, your courage and firmness. Farewell, and be invariably assured that I shall never cease to love you strongly and deeply. Your faithful mother, who loves you to eternity. Sand replied, January 1820, from my Isle of Patmos. My dear parents, brothers, and sisters, in the middle of September last year, I received, through the Grand Duke's Special Commission of Inquiry, whose humanity you have already appreciated, your dear letters from the end of August and the beginning of September. They had such a magical influence that they inundated me with joy by transporting me into the innermost circle of your hearts. You, my tender father, write to me on the 67th anniversary of your birth, and you bless me by the outpouring of your most tender love. You, my beloved mother, promise the continuance of your maternal affection, in which I have always believed. Thus, I have received the blessings of both of you, which, in my present state, will have a more beneficial influence than anything all the kings of the earth, united, could grant me. Yes, your blessed love strengthens me abundantly, and I thank you, my beloved parents, with the respectful submission my heart will always uphold as a son's first duty. But the greater your love and the more affectionate your letters, the more I suffer, I must admit, from the voluntary sacrifice we have made in not seeing one another. The only reason, my dear parents, why I delayed replying to you, was to give myself time to recover the strength I had lost. You too, dear brother-in-law and dear sister, assure me of your sincere and uninterrupted attachment. Yet, after the fright I have caused you all, you seem not to know exactly what to think of me. But my heart, full of gratitude for your past kindness, finds comfort. For your actions speak and tell me that, even if you wished no longer to love me as I love you, you would not be able to do otherwise. These actions mean more to me now than any possible declarations, indeed, more than even the tenderest words. And you also, my kind brother, you would have consented to hurry with our beloved mother to the shores of the Rhine, to this place where the real links of the soul were forged between us, where we were doubly brothers. But tell me, are you not truly here, in thought and spirit, when I consider the rich fountain of consolation brought me by your cordial and tender letter? And you, kind sister-in-law, as you showed yourself from the first, in your delicate tenderness, a true sister, so I find you again now. There are still the same tender relations, still the same sisterly affection. Your consolations, which emanate from a deep and submissive piety, have fallen refreshingly into the depths of my heart. But, dear sister-in-law, I must tell you, as well as the others, that you are too liberal towards me in dispensing your esteem and praises. Your exaggeration has cast me back face to face with my innermost judge, who has shown me in the mirror of my conscience the image of my every weakness. You, kind Julia, desire nothing else but to save me from the fate that awaits me. You assure me, in your own name and in the name of you all, that you, like the others, would rejoice to endure it in my place. In that, I recognize you fully, and I recognize, too, those sweet and tender relations in which we have been raised from childhood. Oh, be comforted, dear Julia. Thanks to the protection of God, I promise you, it will be easy for me, much easier than I would have thought, to bear what falls to my lot. Receive, then, all of you, my warm and sincere thanks for having thus rejoiced my heart. Now that I know from these strengthening letters that, like the prodigal son, the love and goodness of my family are greater upon my return than at my departure, I will, as carefully as possible, describe for you my physical and moral state. I pray God to supplement my words by His strength, so that my letter may contain an equivalent of what yours brought to me, and may help you to reach that state of calm and serenity to which I have myself attained. Hardened by having gained power over myself against the good and ill of this earth, you already knew that in recent years I have lived only for moral joys. I must say that, touched by my efforts, doubtless the Lord, who is the sacred fount of all that is good, has made me adept at seeking and fully tasting them. God is ever near me, as formerly, and I find in Him the sovereign principle of the creation of all things. In Him, our Holy Father, I find not only consolation and strength, but an unalterable friend, full of the holiest love, who will accompany me wherever I may need His consolations. Assuredly, if He had turned from me, or if I had turned my eyes from Him, I would now find myself very unfortunate and wretched. But by His grace, on the contrary, lowly and weak creature as I am, He makes me strong and powerful against whatever can befall me. What I have hitherto revered as sacred, what I have desired as good, what I have aspired to as heavenly, has in no respect changed now. I thank God for it, for I would now be in great despair if I were compelled to recognize that my heart had adored deceptive images and enwrapped itself in fleeting chimeras. Thus, my faith in these ideas and my pure love for them, guardian angels of my spirit as they are, increase moment by moment, and will go on increasing to my end. I hope that I may pass all the more easily from this world into eternity. I pass my silent life in Christian exaltation and humility, and I sometimes have those visions from above through which I have, from my birth, adored heaven upon earth, and which give me power to raise myself to the Lord upon the eager wings of my prayers. My illness, though long, painful, and cruel, has always been sufficiently mastered by my will to let me busy myself to some result with history, positive sciences, and the finer parts of religious education. When my suffering became more violent, and for a time interrupted these occupations, I struggled successfully, nevertheless, against ennui. For the memories of the past, my resignation to the present, and my faith in the future were rich enough and strong enough in me and around me to prevent my falling from my terrestrial paradise. According to my principles, I would never, in the position in which I am and in which I have placed myself, have been willing to ask anything for my own comfort. But so much kindness and care have been lavished upon me, with so much delicacy and humanity, which, alas, I am unable to return, by every person with whom I have been brought into contact, that wishes which I should not have dared to frame in the most private recesses of my heart have been more than exceeded. I have never been so overcome by bodily pains that I could not say within myself, while I lifted my thoughts to heaven, "Come what may of this ray." And great as these gains have been, I could not dream of comparing them with those sufferings of the soul that we feel so profoundly and poignantly in the recognition of our weaknesses and faults. Moreover, these pains seldom now cause me to lose consciousness. The swelling and inflammation never made great headway, and the fever has always been moderate. This is true, even though for nearly 10 months I have been forced to remain lying on my back, unable to raise myself, and although more than 40 pints of matter have come from my chest at the place where the heart is. No, on the contrary, the wound, though still open, is in a good state. I owe that not only to the excellent nursing around me, but also to the pure blood that I received from you, my mother. Thus I have lacked neither earthly assistance nor heavenly encouragement. Thus, on the anniversary of my birth, I had every reason, not to curse the hour in which I was born, but on the contrary, after serious contemplation of the world, to thank God and you, my dear parents, for the life that you have given me. I celebrated it, on the 18th of October, by a peaceful and ardent submission to the holy will of God. On Christmas Day I tried to put myself into the temper of children who are devoted to the Lord, and with God's help the new year will pass like its predecessor, in bodily pain, perhaps, but certainly in spiritual joy. And with this wish, the only one that I form, I address myself to you, my dear parents, and to you and yours, my dear brothers and sisters. I cannot hope to see a 25th New Year, so may the prayer that I have just made be granted. May this picture of my present state afford you some tranquility, And may this letter that I write to you from the depths of my heart not only prove to you that I am not unworthy of the inexpressible love that you all display, but, on the contrary, ensure this love to me for eternity. Within the last few days, I have also received your dear letter of December 2nd, my kind mother, and the Grand Duke's commission has deigned to let me also read my kind brother's letter which accompanied yours. You give me the best of news regarding the health of all of you, and send me preserved fruits from our dear home. I thank you for them from the bottom of my heart. What causes me most joy in the matter is that you have been solicitously busy with me in summer as in winter, and that you and my dear Julia gathered them and prepared them for me at home, and I abandoned my whole soul to that sweet enjoyment. I rejoice sincerely at my little cousin's coming into the world. I joyfully congratulate the good parents and the grandparents. I transport myself, for his baptism, into that beloved parish, where I offer him my affection as his Christian brother, and call down on him all the blessings of heaven. We shall be obliged, I think, to give up this correspondence, so as not to inconvenience the Grand Duke's commission. I finish, therefore, by assuring you once more, but for the last time, perhaps, of my profound filial submission and of my fraternal affection. Your most tenderly attached, Karl-Ludwig Sand. Indeed, from that moment all correspondence between Karl and his family ceased. He only wrote to them, when he knew his fate, one more letter, which we shall see later on. We have seen what care surrounded Sand. Their humanity never flagged for an instant. It is also true that no one saw in him an ordinary murderer. Many pitied him under their breath, and some excused him openly. The very commission appointed by the Grand Duke prolonged the affair as much as possible. At first, the severity of Sand's wounds had led to the belief that there would be no need for the executioner, and the commission was pleased that God should have undertaken the execution of the judgment. But these expectations were deceived. The skill of the doctor was defeated, not indeed the wound, but death. Sand did not recover, but he remained alive, and it began to be evident that it would be necessary to kill him. Indeed, Emperor Alexander, who had appointed Kotzebue his counselor, and who fully understood the cause of the murder, urgently demanded that justice take its course. The commission of inquiry was therefore obliged to set to work. But as its members sincerely desired some pretext to delay their proceedings, they ordered that a physician from Heidelberg should visit Sand and make an exact report upon his case. As Sand was kept lying down and could not be executed in his bed, they hoped that the physician's report, by declaring it impossible for the prisoner to rise, would come to their assistance and necessitate a further respite. The chosen doctor accordingly came to Mannheim. Introducing himself to Sand as though attracted by the interest he inspired, he asked him whether he did not feel somewhat better, and whether it would be impossible to rise. Sand looked at him for an instant, and then said, with a smile, "I understand, sir. They wish to know whether I am strong enough to mount a scaffold. I know nothing about it myself, but we will do the experiment together." With these words he rose. Displaying superhuman courage, he accomplished what he had not attempted for 14 months. He walked twice around the room, returned to his bed, seated himself, and said, "You see, sir, I am strong enough. It would therefore be wasting precious time to keep my judges longer on my affair. So let them deliver their judgment, for nothing now prevents its execution." The doctor made his report. There was no way to retreat. Russia was becoming more and more pressing. On May 5, 1820, the High Court of Justice delivered the following judgment, which was confirmed on the 12th by His Royal Highness the Grand Duke of Baden. In the matters under investigation, and after administering the interrogatory and hearing the defenses, and considering the united opinions of the Court of Justice at Mannheim, and the further consultations of the Court of Justice which declare the accused, Karl Sand of Wunsiedel, guilty of murder, even on his own confession, upon the person of the Russian Imperial Counselor of State, Kotzebue, it is ordered accordingly, for his just punishment and for an example that may deter other people, that he is to be put from life to death by the sword. All the costs of these investigations, including those occasioned by his public execution, will be defrayed from the funds of the Law Department on account of his lack of means. We see that, though it condemned the accused to death, which could hardly be avoided, the sentence was both in form and substance as mild as possible. Sand was convicted, yet his poor family was not reduced to complete ruin by the expenses of a long and costly trial. 5 days were still allowed to elapse, and the verdict was not announced until the 17th. When Sand was informed that 2 counselors of justice were at the door, he guessed they were coming to read his sentence to him. He asked for a moment to rise, which he had done but once before, in the instance already narrated during 14 months. Indeed, he was so weak that he could not stand to hear the sentence. After greeting the deputation that death sent to him, he asked to sit down, saying that he did so not from cowardice of soul but from weakness of body. Then he added, "You are welcome, gentlemen, for I have suffered so much for 14 months that you come to me as angels of deliverance." He heard the sentence quite unaffectedly, with a gentle smile upon his lips. Then, when the reading was finished, he said, "I look for no better fate, gentlemen. When more than a year ago, I paused on the little hill that overlooks the town, I saw beforehand the place where my grave would be. So I ought to thank God and man for having prolonged my existence up to today." The counselors withdrew. Sand stood up a second time to greet them on their departure, as he had done on their entrance. Then he sat down again pensively in his chair, by which Mr. G., the governor of the prison, was standing. After a moment of silence, a tear appeared at each of the condemned man's eyelids and ran down his cheeks. Then, turning suddenly to Mr. G., whom he liked very much, said, "I hope that my parents would rather see me die by this violent death than by some slow and shameful disease. As for me, I am glad that I shall soon hear the hour strike in which my death will satisfy those who hate me, and those whom, according to my principles, I ought to hate." Then he wrote to his family. Mannheim, 17th of the month of spring, 1820. "Dear parents, brothers, and sisters, you should have received my last letters through the Grand Duke's commission. In them, I answered yours and tried to console you for my position by describing the state of my soul as it is, the contempt to which I have attained for everything fragile and earthly, and by which one must necessarily be overcome when such matters are weighed against the fulfillment of an idea, or that intellectual liberty which alone can nourish the soul. In a word, I tried to console you by the assurance that the feelings, principles, and convictions of which I formerly spoke are faithfully preserved in me, and have remained exactly the same. But I am sure all this was an unnecessary precaution on my part, for there was never a time when you asked anything else of me other than to have God before my eyes and in my heart. You have seen how, under your guidance, this precept so passed into my soul that it became my sole object of happiness for this world and the next. No doubt, as he was in and near me, God will be in and near you at the moment when this letter brings you the news of my sentence. I die willingly, and the Lord will give me strength to die as one ought to die. I write to you perfectly quiet and calm about all things, and I hope that your lives too will pass calmly and tranquilly until the moment when our souls meet again, full of fresh force to love one another and to share eternal happiness together. As for me, I have lived as long as I have known myself, that is to say, in a serenity full of celestial desires and a courageous and indefatigable love of liberty, such that I am about to die. May God be with you and with me. Your son, brother, and friend, Karl-Ludwig Sand. From that moment, his serenity remained untroubled. During the whole day he talked more gaily than usual, slept well, and did not awake until 7:30. He said he felt stronger and thanked God for visiting him thus. The nature of the verdict had been known since the day before, and it had been learned that the execution was fixed for May 20th, 3 full days after the sentence had been read to the accused. Henceforward, with Sand's permission, persons who wished to speak to him, and whom he was not reluctant to see, were admitted. 3 among these paid him long and noteworthy visits. One was Major Holzungen of the Baden Army, who commanded the patrol that had arrested him, or rather picked him up, dying, and carried him to the hospital. He asked Sand if he recognized him. Sand's head was so clear when he stabbed himself that, although he saw the major only for a moment and had never seen him again since, he remembered the minutest details of the full-dress uniform he had been wearing 14 months previously. When the talk turned to the death to which Sand was to submit at such an early age, the major pitied him. But Sand answered with a smile, "There is only one difference between you and me, Major. It is that I shall die for my convictions, and you will die for someone else's convictions." After the major came a young student from Jena whom Sand had known at the university. He happened to be in the Duchy of Baden and wished to visit him. Their recognition was touching, and the student wept a lot. But Sand consoled him with his usual calmness and serenity. Then a workman asked to be admitted to see Sand, on the plea that he had been his schoolfellow at Wonsiedel. Although he did not remember his name, Sand ordered him to be let in. The workman reminded him that he had been one of the little army Sand had commanded on the day of the assault of St. Catherine's Tower. This indication guided Sand, who recognized him perfectly, and then spoke with tender affection of his native place and his dear mountains. He further charged him to greet his family, and to beg his mother, father, brothers, and sisters once more not to be grieved on his account, since the messenger who undertook to deliver his last words could testify in how calm and joyful a temper he was awaiting death. This workman was succeeded by one of the guests Sand had met on the staircase directly after Kotzebue's death. He asked Sand whether he acknowledged his crime and whether he felt any repentance. Sand replied, "I had thought about it for a whole year. I have been thinking of it for 14 months, and my opinion has never varied in any respect. I did what I should have done." After the departure of this last visitor, Sand sent for Mr. G, the governor of the prison, and told him that he would like to talk to the executioner before the execution. He wished to ask for instructions on how he should hold himself, so as to make the operation most certain and easy. Mr. G made some objections, but Sand insisted with his usual gentleness, and Mr. G at last promised that the man in question should be asked to call at the prison as soon as he arrived from Heidelberg, where he lived. The rest of the day was spent seeing more visitors and in philosophical and moral talks, in which Sand developed his social and religious theories with a lucidity of expression and an elevation of thought such as he had, perhaps, never before shown. The governor of the prison, from whom I heard these details, told me that he would all his life regret that he did not know shorthand, so that he might have noted all these thoughts, which would have formed a pendant to the Phaedo. Night came. Sand spent part of the evening writing. It is thought that he was composing a poem, but no doubt he burned it, for no trace of it was found. At 11 he went to bed and slept until 6 in the morning. The next day he bore the dressing of his wound, which was always very painful, with extraordinary courage, without fainting, as he sometimes did, and without a single complaint escaping him. He had spoken the truth. In the presence of death, God gave him the grace of allowing his strength to return. The operation was over. Sand was lying down as usual, and Mr. G was sitting on the foot of his bed, when the door opened and a man came in and bowed to Sand and to Mr. G. The governor of the prison immediately stood up and said to Sand in a voice whose emotion he could not conceal, "The person who is bowing to you is Mr. Weidmann of Heidelberg, to whom you wished to speak." Then Sand's face lit up with a strange joy. He sat up and said, "Sir, you are welcome." Then, making his visitor sit down by his bed, and taking his hand, he began to thank him for being so obliging, and spoke in such an intense tone and so gentle a voice, that Mr. Weidmann, deeply moved, could not answer. Sand encouraged him to speak and to give him the details for which he wished, and in order to reassure him, said, "Be firm, sir, for I, on my part, will not fail you. I will not move. And even if you should need 2 or 3 strokes to separate my head from my body, as I am told is sometimes the case, do not be troubled on that account." Then Sand rose, leaning on Mr. G, to go through with the executioner the strange and terrible rehearsal of the drama, in which he was to play the leading part on the morrow. Mr. Weidmann made him sit in a chair and take the required position, and went into all the details of the execution with him. Then Sand, perfectly instructed, begged him not to hurry and to take his time. Then he thanked him beforehand, for, added he, "Afterwards I shall not be able." Then Sand returned to his bed, leaving the executioner paler and more trembling than himself. All these details have been preserved by Mr. G. For as to the executioner, his emotion was so great that he could remember nothing. After Mr. Weidmann, 3 clergymen were introduced, with whom Sand conversed on religious matters. One of them stayed 6 hours with him, and on leaving him, told him that he was commissioned to obtain from him a promise of not speaking to the people at the place of execution. Sand gave the promise, and added, "Even if I desired to do so, my voice has become so weak that people could not hear it." Meanwhile, the scaffold was being erected in the meadow that extends on the left of the road to Heidelberg. It was a platform 5 to 6 feet high and 10 feet wide each way. As it was expected that, Thanks to the interest inspired by the prisoner and to the nearness to Whitsuntide, the crowd would be immense, and as some movement from the universities was apprehended, the prison guards had been trebled. General Nustian had been ordered to Mannheim from Karlsruhe, with 1,200 infantry, 350 cavalry, and a company of artillery with guns. On the afternoon of the 19th, as had been foreseen, so many students arrived, taking up abodes in the neighboring villages, that it was decided to advance the hour of the execution, and to let it take place at 5 in the morning instead of at 11, as had been arranged. But Sand's consent was necessary for this, for he could not be executed until 3 full days after the reading of his sentence, and as the sentence had not been read to him till 10:30, Sand had a right to live till 11 o'clock. Before 4 in the morning, the officials went into the condemned man's room. He was sleeping so soundly that they were obliged to awaken him. He opened his eyes with a smile, as was his custom, and guessing why they came, asked, "Can I have slept so well that it is already 11 in the morning?" They told him that it was not, but that they had come to ask his permission to advance the time. For they told him, some collision between the students and the soldiers was feared, and as the military preparations were very thorough, such a collision could not be otherwise fatal to his friends. Sand answered that he was ready at that very moment, and only asked for enough time to take a bath, as the ancients were accustomed to do before going into battle. But as the verbal authorization which he had given was not sufficient, a pen and paper were given to Sand, and he wrote, with a steady hand and in his usual writing, "I thank the authorities of Mannheim for anticipating my most eager wishes by making my execution 6 hours earlier. Sit nomen Domini benedictum. From the prison room, May 20th, day of my deliverance. Karl-Ludwig Sand." When Sand had given these 2 lines to the recorder, the physician came to him to dress his wound, as usual. Sand looked at him with a smile, and then asked, "Is it really worth the trouble?" "You will be stronger for it," answered the physician. "Then do it," said Sand. A bath was brought. Sand lay down in it, and had his long and beautiful hair arranged with the greatest care. Then, his toilet completed, he put on a frock coat of the German style, that is to say, short and with the shirt collar turned back over the shoulders, close white trousers, and high boots. Then Sand seated himself on his bed, and prayed some time in a low voice with the clergy. Then, when he had finished, he said these 2 lines of Corner's: "All that is earthly is ended, and the life of heaven begins." He next took leave of the physician and the priests, saying to them, "Do not attribute the emotion of my voice to weakness, but to gratitude." Then, upon these gentlemen offering to accompany him to the scaffold, he said, "There is no need. I am perfectly prepared, at peace with God and with my conscience. Besides, am I not almost a churchman myself?" And when one of them asked whether he was not going out of life in a spirit of hatred, he returned, "Why, good heavens, have I ever felt any?" An increasing noise was audible from the street, and Sand said again that he was at their disposal and ready. At this moment, the executioner came in with his 2 assistants. He was dressed in a long, wadded black coat, beneath which he hid his sword. Sand offered him his hand affectionately. As Mr. Weidman, embarrassed by the sword he wished to keep Sand from seeing, did not venture forward, Sand said to him, "Come along and show me your sword. I have never seen one of the kind, and am curious to know what it is like." Mr. Weidman, pale and trembling, presented the weapon to him. Sand examined it attentively and tested the edge with his finger. "Come," he said, "the blade is good. Do not tremble, and all will go well." Then, turning to Mr. G., who was weeping, he said to him, "You will be good enough, will you not, to do me the service of leading me to the scaffold?" Mr. G. made a sign of assent with his head, for he could not answer. Sand took his arm and spoke for the 3rd time, saying once more, "Well, what are you waiting for, gentlemen? I am ready." When they reached the courtyard, Sand saw all the prisoners weeping at their windows. Although he had never seen them, they were old friends of his, for every time they passed his door, knowing that the student who had killed Kotzebue lay within, they used to lift their chain, so that he might not be disturbed by the noise. All Mannheim was in the streets that led to the place of execution, and many patrols were passing up and down. On the day when the sentence was announced, the whole town had been searching for a chaise in which to convey Sand to the scaffold, but no one, not even the coach builders, would either let one out or sell one. It had been necessary, therefore, to buy one at Heidelberg without saying for what purpose. Sand found this chaise in the courtyard and got into it with Mr. G. Turning to him, he whispered in his ear, "Sir, if you see me turn pale, speak my name to me. My name only, do you hear? That will be enough." The prison gate was opened, and Sand was seen. Then every voice cried with one impulse, "Farewell, Sand, farewell." At the same time, flowers, some of which fell into the carriage, were thrown by the crowd that thronged the street and from the windows. At these friendly cries and at this spectacle, Sand, who until then had shown no moment of weakness, felt tears rising in spite of himself. While he returned the greetings made to him on all sides, he murmured in a low voice, "Oh my God, give me courage." This first outburst over, the procession set out amid deep silence. Only now and again some single voice would call out, "Farewell, Sand," and a handkerchief waved by some hand that rose out of the crowd would show from what point the last call came. On each side of the chaise walked two of the prison officials, and behind the chaise came a second conveyance with the municipal authorities. The air was very cold. It had rained all night, and the dark and cloudy sky seemed to share in the general sadness. Sand, too weak to remain sitting up, was half lying upon the shoulder of Mr. G., his companion. His face was gentle, calm, and full of pain. His brow was free and open, his features, interesting though without regular beauty, seemed to have aged by several years during the 14 months of suffering that had just elapsed. The chaise at last reached the place of execution, which was surrounded by a battalion of infantry. Sand lowered his eyes from heaven to earth and saw the scaffold. At this sight he smiled gently, and as he left the carriage he said, "Well, God has given me strength so far." The governor of the prison and the chief officials lifted him, so he could go up the steps. During that short ascent, pain kept him bowed. But when he had reached the top, he stood erect again, saying, "Here then is the place where I am to die." Then, before he came to the chair on which he was to be seated for the execution, he turned his eyes towards Mannheim, and his gaze traveled over all the throng that surrounded him. At that moment, a ray of sunshine broke through the clouds. Sand greeted it with a smile and sat down. Then, as, according to the orders given, his sentence was to be read to him a second time, he was asked whether he felt strong enough to hear it standing. Sand answered that he would try, and that if his physical strength failed him, his moral strength would uphold him. He rose immediately from the fatal chair, begging Mr. G. to stand near enough to support him if he should have a chance to stagger. The precaution was unnecessary. Sand did not stagger. After the judgment had been read, he sat down again, and I said in a loud voice, "I die trusting in God." But at these words, Mr. G. interrupted him. "Sand," he said, "what did you promise?" "True," he answered, "I had forgotten." He was silent, therefore, to the crowd. But, raising his right hand and extending it solemnly in the air, he said in a low voice, so that he might be heard only by those who were around him, "I take God to witness that I die for the freedom of Germany." Then, with these words, he did as Conradin did with his glove. He threw his rolled-up handkerchief over the line of soldiers around him, into the midst of the people. Then the executioner came to cut off his hair, but Sand at first objected. "It is for your mother," said Mr. Weidman. "On your honor, sir?" asked Sand. "On my honor." "Then do it," said Sand, offering his hair to the executioner. Only a few curls were cut off, those only which fell at the back. The others were tied with a ribbon on the top of the head. The executioner then tied his hands on his breast, but as that position was oppressive to him and compelled him on account of his wound to bend his head, his hands were laid flat on his thighs and fixed in that position with ropes. Then, when his eyes were about to be bound, he begged Mr. Weidman to place the bandage in such a manner that he could see the light to his last moment. His wish was fulfilled. Then a profound and mortal stillness hovered over the whole crowd and surrounded the scaffold. The executioner drew his sword, which flashed like lightning and fell. Instantly a terrible cry rose at once from 20,000 bosoms. The head had not fallen, and though it had sunk towards the breast, still held to the neck. The executioner struck a second time, and struck off at the same blow the head and a part of the hand. In the same moment, notwithstanding the efforts of the soldiers, their line was broken through. Men and women rushed upon the scaffold. The blood was wiped up to the last drop with handkerchiefs. The chair upon which Sand had sat was broken and divided into pieces, and those who could not obtain one cut fragments of blood-stained wood from the scaffold itself. The head and body were placed in a coffin draped with black and carried back, with a large military escort, to the prison. At midnight the body was borne silently, without torches or lights, to the Protestant cemetery, in which Kotzebue had been buried 14 months previously. A grave had been mysteriously dug, the coffin was lowered into it, and those who were present at the burial were sworn upon the New Testament not to reveal the spot where Sand was buried until such time as they were freed from their oath. Then the grave was covered again with the turf that had been skillfully taken off, and that was laid on the same spot, so that no new grave could be perceived. Then the nocturnal gravediggers departed, leaving guards at the entrance. There, 20 paces apart, Sand and Kotzebue rest. Kotzebue opposite the gate in the most conspicuous spot of the cemetery, and beneath a tomb upon which is engraved this inscription: "The world persecuted him without pity. Calumny was his sad portion. He found no happiness save in the arms of his wife, and no repose save in the bosom of death. Envy dogged him to cover his path with thorns. Love bade his roses blossom. May heaven pardon him as he pardons earth." In contrast with this tall and showy monument, standing, as we have said, in the most conspicuous spot of the cemetery, Sand's grave must be looked for in the corner to the extreme left of the entrance gate. A wild plum tree, some leaves of which every passing traveler carries away, rises alone upon the grave, which is devoid of any inscription. As for the meadow in which Sand was executed, it is still called by the people Sand's Himmelsfahrtsweise, which signifies the manner of Sand's ascension. Toward the end of September 1838, we were at Mannheim, where I had stayed 3 days to collect all the details I could find about the life and death of Karl-Ludwig Sand. But at the end of these 3 days, despite my active investigations, these details still remained extremely incomplete, either because I applied in the wrong quarters or because, being a foreigner, I inspired some distrust in those to whom I applied. I was leaving Mannheim, therefore, somewhat disappointed, and after having visited the little Protestant cemetery where Sand and Kotzebue are buried 20 paces from each other, I had ordered my driver to take the road to Heidelberg. After going a few yards, he, who knew the object of my inquiries, stopped himself and asked me whether I should not like to see the place where Sand was executed. At the same time, he pointed to a little mound situated in the middle of a meadow and a few steps from a brook. I assented eagerly, and although the driver remained on the highroad with my traveling companions, I soon recognized the spot indicated by means of some relics of cypress branches, immortelles, and forget-me-nots scattered upon the earth. It will readily be understood that this sight, instead of diminishing my desire for information, increased it. I was feeling then more than ever dissatisfied at going away, knowing so little, when I saw a man of some 45 to 50 years old, who was walking a little distance from the place where I myself was, and who, guessing the cause that drew me thither, was looking at me with curiosity. I was determined to make a last effort, and going up to him, I said, "Oh, sir, I am a stranger. I am traveling to collect all the rich and poetic traditions of your Germany. By the way in which you look at me, I guess that you know which of them attracts me to this meadow. Could you give me any information about the life and death of Sand?" "With what object, sir?" The person to whom I spoke asked me in almost unintelligible French. "With a very German object, be assured, sir," I replied. "From the little I have learned, Sand seems to me to be one of those ghosts that appear only the greater and the more poetic for being wrapped in a shroud stained with blood. But he is not known in France. He might be put on the same level there with a Fieschi or a Meunier, and I wish, to the best of my ability, to enlighten the minds of my countrymen about him. It would be a great pleasure to me, sir, to assist in such an undertaking, but you see that I can scarcely speak French. You do not speak German at all, so that we shall find it difficult to understand each other." "If that is all," I returned, "I have in my carriage yonder an interpreter, or rather an interpretess, with whom you will, I hope, be quite satisfied, who speaks German like Goethe, and to whom, when you have once begun to speak to her, I defy you not to tell everything." "Let us go then, sir," answered the pedestrian. "I ask no better than to be agreeable to you." We walked toward the carriage, which was still waiting on the highroad, and I presented to my traveling companion the new recruit whom I had just gained. The usual greetings were exchanged, and the dialogue began in the purest Saxon. Though I did not understand a word that was said, it was easy for me to see, by the rapidity of the questions and the length of the answers, that the conversation was most interesting. At last, at the end of half an hour, growing desirous of knowing to what point they had come, I said, "Well, well," answered my interpreter, "you are in luck, and you could not have asked a better person." "The gentleman knew Sand, then?" "The gentleman is the governor of the prison in which Sand was confined." "Indeed?" "For 9 months, that is to say, from the day he left the hospital, this gentleman saw him every day." "Excellent! But that is not all. This gentleman was with him in the carriage that took him to execution. This gentleman was with him on the scaffold. There's only one portrait of Sand in all of Mannheim, and this gentleman has it." I was devouring every word. A mental alchemist, I was opening my crucible and finding gold in it. "Just ask," I resumed eagerly, "whether the gentleman will allow us to take down in writing the particulars that he can give me." My interpreter asked another question, then, turning towards me, said, "Granted." Mr. G got into the carriage with us, and instead of going on to Heidelberg, we returned to Mannheim and alighted at the prison. Mr. G did not once depart from the ready kindness he had shown. In the most obliging manner, patient over the minutest trifles, and remembering most happily, he went over every circumstance, putting himself at my disposal like a professional guide. At last, when every detail about Sand had been thoroughly explored, I began to ask him about the manner in which executions were performed. "As to that," he said, "I can offer you an introduction to someone at Heidelberg who can give you all the information you can wish for upon the subject." I accepted gratefully, and as I was taking leave of Mr. G, after thanking him 1,000 times, he handed me the offered letter. It bore this superscription: "To Herr Dr. Weidmann, No. the 3rd High Street, Heidelberg." I turned to Mr. G once more. "Is he, by chance, a relation of the man who executed Sand?" I asked. "He is his son, and was standing by when the head fell." "What is his calling, then?" "The same as that of his father, whom he succeeded." "But you call him doctor?" "Certainly, with us, executioners have that title." "But then doctors of what?" "Of surgery." "Really?" I said. "With us it is just the contrary. Surgeons are called executioners." "You will find him, moreover," added Mr. G, "a very distinguished young man, who, although he was very young at that time, has retained a vivid recollection of that event. As for his poor father, I think he would as willingly have cut off his own right hand as have executed Sand. But if he had refused, someone else would have been found. So he had to do what he was ordered to do, and he did his best." I thanked Mr. G, fully resolving to make use of his letter, and we left for Heidelberg, where we arrived at 11 in the evening. My first visit the next day was to Dr. Weidmann. It was not without some emotion which, moreover, I saw reflected on the faces of my traveling companions, that I rang at the door of the last judge, as the Germans call him. An old woman opened the door to us and ushered us into a pretty little study, on the left of a passage and at the foot of a staircase, where we waited while Mr. Weidmann finished dressing. This little room was full of curiosities, madrepores, shells, stuffed birds, and dried plants. A double-barreled gun, a powder flask, and a game bag showed that Mr. Weidmann was a hunter. After a moment, we heard his footsteps and the door opened. Mr. Weidmann was a very handsome young man of 30 or 32, with black whiskers entirely surrounding his manly and expressive face. His morning dress showed a certain rural elegance. He seemed at first not only embarrassed but pained by our visit. The aimless curiosity of which he seemed to be the object was indeed odd. I hastened to give him Mr. G.'s letter and to tell him what reason brought me. Then he gradually recovered himself, and at last showed himself no less hospitable and obliging towards us than he to whom we owed the introduction had been the day before. Mr. Weidmann then gathered together all his remembrances. He, too, had retained a vivid recollection of Sand, and he told us among other things that his father, at the risk of bringing himself into ill favor, had asked leave to have a new scaffold made at his own expense, so that no other criminal might be executed upon the altar of the martyr's death. Permission had been given, and Mr. Weidmann had used the wood of the scaffold for the doors and windows of a little country house standing in a vineyard. Then for 3 or 4 years this cottage became a shrine for pilgrims. But after a time, little by little, the crowd grew less, and at the present day, when some of those who wiped the blood from the scaffold with their handkerchiefs have become public functionaries, receiving salaries from government. Only foreigners ask, now and again, to see these strange relics. Mr. Weidman gave me a guide, for after hearing everything, I wanted to see everything. The house stands half a league away from Heidelberg, on the left of the road to Karlsruhe, and halfway up the mountainside. It is perhaps the only monument of its kind that exists in the world. Our readers will judge better from this anecdote than from anything more we could say what sort of man he was who left such a memory in the hearts of his jailer and his executioner.